Hello again. Almost everything that we see around us was designed or invented by people of European origin. Mains electricity, electric lights, motor cars, aeroplanes, computers, mobile phones, televisions, you name it, Europeans thought of it and turned it into a reality. The same is true of intellectual matters. The theory of relativity, the origin of species, calculus, all these things were a product of European thought. Civilization, as we see it now, is a product of Europe and the descendants of Europeans in North America and Australia. Some things, such as Christianity, arose in the Middle East, which is also, of course, where writing and mathematics first appeared. All this is very disheartening for Africans and the native inhabitants of Australia. How come they didn't invent aeroplanes or calculus? In recent years, an entire industry has sprung up which is determined to remedy this unpalatable situation by pretending that Africans and Australian aborigines did invent the aeroplane and come up with the idea of complex mathematics before Europeans. You laugh? You mock? Come with me now through the looking glass to the weird universe of alternative history. The aim of the revisionist history about which I'm talking is to make Africans and Australians feel better about themselves by telling them that they invented things thousands of years before Europeans. Take prime numbers, for example. The concept of prime numbers began with the ancient Greeks. It is necessary, of course, to be able to undertake the mathematical operation of division if you wish to ascertain whether a given number can be divided only by itself and 1, which is what makes a number prime. The first mention of prime numbers is in Euclid's Elements, written about 300 BC. In 1950, a baboon's leg bone was found in the Congo. It was covered with scratches and later found to be 20,000 years old. Nobody knows what the scratches on the bone mean, but they may indicate a tally stick, in other words, for counting livestock or something like that, just making a one-to-one correspondence. Possibly, though, there are a record of days, one scratch for each day, but nobody really knows. It's now often suggested by those who wish to promote a revised version of African history that this baboon bone shows that Africans in the Congo 20,000 years ago knew about prime numbers, and that rather than emerging in Egypt and Babylon, mathematics actually started in the Congo 20 or 30,000 years ago. I give a link to a piece about the Ishango bone, as it's called, in the description to this video. The piece is, believe it or not, from the mathematics department of the State University of New York at Buffalo, and it's put up there with the aim of encouraging black people to believe various untruthful things about their ancestors. It's in Australia that this kind of thing is flourishing most strongly, for reasons which I can only guess. The body responsible for what children learn at school in that nation is called the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, and they are desperately keen to persuade children that the Aboriginal inhabitants of Australia were more sophisticated than anybody has previously guessed. I give a link to a piece about this too in the description to this video. Cindy Berwick is one of the advisors to the Curriculum Authority, as well as being president of the New South Wales Aboriginal Education Consultation Group, which is an independent Aboriginal community-controlled organisation recognised as the peak advisory body on Aboriginal education and training in New South Wales. Impressive qualifications there. Here is what she said in 2018. We actually look at mathematics and science and technology through a cultural lens, and so we actually teach aerodynamics through the boomerang, because the boomerang actually led to the invention of propellers, which then led to flight, then led, the invention of drones, which now patrol our coastlines and save us from sharks. This woman is actually advising on what children in Australian schools should be learning. The good Lord alone knows why. And we'll have to keep our fingers crossed for the education of Australian children, obviously. There are one or two points to consider in this really odd statement. The first is that boomerangs are not an especially Australian thing. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, a collection of boomerangs were found. Apparently he was something of a collector of them. There's a whole bunch of them there, with aerodynamic surfaces, so they'll come back again. The first boomerangs were probably being used during the Ice Age in Europe, or even earlier than that. Boomerangs carved out of mammoth tusks have been found, and again in the traditional way with the shape which will cause them to come back once they've been thrown. The first propellers were used in Europe during the middle of the 18th century to drive boats. This is when the first screw propellers were used, and this was long before Captain Cook set foot in Australia and news of the aborigines boomerangs reached Europe. Some people that were experimenting with airships in the 19th century thought that it might be possible to use those ship's propellers in the same way in the air to drive an airship along. And the first time that they were used in this way was in France in 1852, when a man called Henri Giffard was foolish enough to link up a coal-fired steam engine with a hydrogen balloon and managed to drive it along. It was the world's first powered aircraft. He used a propeller based on one of the design for ship's propellers, and it worked reasonably well. Somehow it didn't blow up. The propellers that were used for this are the same design that the Wright brothers later used for the first aeroplane to take off under their own power. We can see a continuous line of development from those early ship's propellers all the way through to modern aeroplane propellers. Boomerangs had actually nothing at all to do with the matter. This was all entirely European. I don't know why Australia seems to be blazing a trail in nonsense of this kind, but I've heard some quite extraordinary stories about what's being taught in schools there. It all stems from jealousy on the part of ethnic groups who are not European, and a desire to prove that they could have done just as well, if not from racism,